You kind of look like family. You're all invited for Thanksgiving. This song is called Outshine.
Okay, we're gonna do something cool today. Well, I mean, I'm a huge dork, so take that with a grain of salt, but hey, I think it's cool. We already talked about grunge killing hair metal and the hilarity that ensued, but it's actually kind of revisionist history to say that it all happened at once. In reality, there was a lot of 90s metal and grunge coexistence, sometimes even at the same time. Take the metallic and even proggish Soundgarden here on Outshined with its 7/4 time signature. And ultimately, no bands illustrate this coexistence better than the prog metal bands of the 80s transitioning into their 90s modes, which is what we're going to look at today. They weren't trying to stay cool because they were never cool to begin with. And in the 90s, being uncool kind of made them cool, though not necessarily to the audiences far and wide that grungers were cool to. But also, more than overtly looking to co-opt grunge, a lot of these bands simply found a new voice embracing the greater diversity of what we came to call alternative rock. And instead of looking like total jokes, they pulled it off and found their place to fit in. So let's see what angles of attack they used and how it worked out for them. As always, I'll link the vids in the description if you want to hear them in full. Now, let's do it up. Ditch the Aquanet, but don't grab the scissors. Let's check out some 80s prog metal bands in the alternative 90s. Let's start with Queensrÿche. From Seattle, the very land of grunge. They tore it up in the 80s with prog metal albums like The Warning, Rage for Order, and Operation Mindcrime. They even started sonically transitioning with 1990's Empire album and the big hit ballad Silent Lucidity. That transition may have been their biggest spotlight moment, but when they dropped 1994's Promised Land album, they had vaulted over fully into a new sonic realm. This is the lead single, I Am I, and it's firmly footed in new alternative soundscapes while retaining the prog and the metal elements the band was known and beloved for. There's a reason we just glanced at Soundgarden too. There, we had a grinding riff, heavy distorted guitars, smart but lumbering drums, and a vocally adept frontman, Chris Cornell, shrieking it out atop it all. And here we have a grinding riff, distorted guitars, smart but lumbering drums, and a vocally adept frontman, Jeff Tate, shrieking it out atop it all. And while Queensrÿche was never a stranger to darkness, with the Promised Land album, the band really leans into the moodier darkness that grunge and alternative rock were popularizing. I'd even go so far as to say that it was an element always within them, but finally they were in a cultural climate where it was more acceptable and less cringe to really bring it out. That's just a funny thing to think about. How in the 80s all the big hair and bravado wasn't cringe, but this might be. Like, why so serious, guys? We experienced a cultural cringe flip. The rest of the album stays within this general vibe while traversing to more dark acoustic areas and some other more drawn-out proggy soundscape-ish departures, and it really all in all kind of encapsulates a favorite moment of their discography for me. They wouldn't stay here long though, they kept moving. I was kind of bummed to find there wasn't a video for the lead single from the next album, 1997's Here in the Now Frontier. So let's look at this live performance from, I think, 2003. The no video thing is possibly a grungy Seattle alternative philosophy related thing too. For instance, after Alive, Even Flow, and Jeremy, Pearl Jam basically decided they were done with videos. It's all about the music, man. And with Here in the Now Frontier's further change into alternative rock, and even being recorded in part at Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam's studio, I could see there not being a video a totally intentional artistic statement kind of a thing. Or, you know, a budget thing. The guitar hook on the single Sign of the Times taps something super 90s alternative rock to me too, with its little guitar melody bend. It's a kind of move you'd hear in wonky stuff like the Toadies' Possum Kingdom, or bigger, dreamier stuff like the Smashing Pumpkins' Rocket, or even just rocked out stuff like Space Hog's In the Meantime. It's all great. There should be a name for that thing. The 90s wiggle wonk or something. And on the vocals, Jeff Tate is reining it in a little more, shrieking less, more alterna rock singer, less opera metal god, and Here in the Now Frontier kind of stays in this mode while somewhat exploring other like areas of modern rock radio of the time. It's not as captivating as Promised Land, but it's worth a listen, and after this album the band began the real era of lineup changes and drift away. But in general, 90s Reich is a fun ride. To call King's X in the 80s just a prog metal band would be wrong. But when you're talking about 80s prog metal, King's X is one of the big names to name. They just always did so much. They were prog, like, yeah, they did odd time signatures and stuff like that, but they were also prog, like, just flipping a radio dial. They had rock, they had funk, they had melody, they had discordance. They just went all over and did all this cool stuff. Albums like Out of the Silent Planet and Gretchen Goes to Nebraska were cut from the proggy fantasy sci-fi cloth of Rush conceptually. But sonically, they jammed. Apparently, Diamond Rex from Pantera loved these guys who also hailed from Texas. Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam claims they invented grunge, so to speak. So when the band dropped their 1994 album Dogman, they were pretty well in step with their new contemporaries, and they themselves sounding more contemporary than ever. The album's even produced by Brendan O'Brien, who had done Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots. It sounds great. The biggest change from older King's X on Dogman is it's heavier, it's dirtier, and lyrically it's darker. King's X in the 80s was really positive. They had ties to Christian rock and there was a lot of spirituality in the lyrics, even though they denounced the label. And in those days they had this producer, Sam Taylor, who really pushed for that positive messaging. But Dogman was a rebellion. Absolutely an agnostic statement, an about-face. Even the title, Dogman, Dogma, coincidence? I think not. No one has ever labeled this album ex-evangelical, I don't think, but it kind of is. And it sounds like young musicians growing into adults and breaking free of the ties that bind them. Oh, also the riffs are huge and crushing and just rule. And though spirituality may be damned, singer Doug Pinnick's voice has never been more full of soul. The band themselves even state that this was the first album they were really being themselves. The whole album rips. I buy the Dogman ticket and I take the ride, fully. King's X did one more great album for Atlantic Records in 1996 with the release of Ear Candy. It's a little fuzzier and mellower. But then the band got dropped and signed with Metal Blade, and I really want to touch on this 1998 single, Fade, from their Metal Blade debut, Tapehead. I love how this really illustrates so much of the post-major label experience. And this is kind of the beginning of the truly more accessible technological era where bands could start putting together music videos without the huge major label budgets, make cool albums in smaller studios, capture a vision and a sound that's honest to them, and continue to reach their audiences. And sonically, King's X is just kind of cruising along with their blend of everything. Riffs that churn, cool background vocal arrangements that elevate beyond the basic alterna rock. They built their vessel. They didn't need a major label to sustain it. They had the infrastructure within themselves and their new label to get it all done, and they basically continued to get it done as the years rolled on. Unlike the Reich, the 90s did not end with the beginning of their unraveling of sorts. The 90s ended with them equipped and capable, and they pumped out 5 more solid albums with the same original lineup through the aughts. While I'd say that major label King's X is the King's X to focus on, if you happen to really dig it and want more of the good stuff, just keep following the trail on down the road, as they provided a lot more good stuff for all of those that love them. Like I did way back then. Oh yeah, we're at the Fates Warning part of the show. I've been looking forward to this one. They kicked out so much fantastical sci-fi prog in the 80s with albums like Awaken the Guardian, Night on Brocken, No Exit, The Spectre Within, and Perfect Symmetry. They did change arcing into the 90s, in some ways similar to the other bands, but they really held on to the prog and the metal a lot more tightly than the others, as evidenced here in this video for the single Monument, off of 1994's Inside Out album. These guys were on Metal Blade Records from The Drop, not a major label, and they were not going for any big breakthrough, but their sound did modernize. You get a lot more of that dark, moody 90s angularity, less operatic vocals, more focused on cool, weaving melody, and more relaxed and stripped-down aesthetics. In the 80s, there were sci-fi scenes and whimsical characters on album covers, but Inside Out's cover is basically a simple textural image, with the album title Inside Out written in this font that is, well, inside out. My favorite thing about 90s Fates Warning is they had become this well-oiled and unique aesthetic machine. They didn't look too far off from a band like Alice in Chains or something, but there's not a whiff of heroin around here. In fact, the music sounds super cerebral. More cerebral than any 80s prog, and even ties sonically into other heavy and thoughtful 90s pursuits like Cynic's Focus or Death's Symbolic. You also get this super cool solo that works off of a harmonic created by touching the string to the pickup and picking right next to it or something crazy like that. This is totally in the line of creative sound soloing that Tom Morello would always bust out in Rage Against the Machine, just in a very different context. While Fates Warning are the furthest from alternative rock that we're going to look at, this may be the closest thing to what I would call alternative prog metal, and that, I think, is pretty sweet. They also continued to keep it prog with 1997's A Pleasant Shade of Grey. There are no music videos because the whole album is one song that is over 53 minutes long and divided into 12 tracks. In fact, you can go just watch this one video of them doing it live. Now, we could get into philosophical discussions about whether that's really the case, or this is actually 12 songs stitched together, but, you know, that would be just way too prog of us for this video, so we're gonna roll with it. Again, going with the alternative prog metal classification, this sounds very different from other historical long prog rock opus works that came before it. It has angular crushing grooves and heavy harmonics and all sorts of dingy dark vibes going on. There's even little hints of industrial and classical. It just goes in a lot of really cool directions and never breaks the overall tone. This is probably my choice work for 90s Fates Warning. It's ambitious, it doesn't really care if you like it or not, and it delivers on everything it sets out to do. Also worth noting, they got early Rush producer Terry Brown on board. It's genuinely impressive, and I should probably come back to it more than I do, but hey, I got things to do. Still, if you like 53-minute crazy alternative prog metal opuses, this is for you. And if you don't, or don't yet, but think that maybe this does sound cool or far out or whatever, give it the long cruise. It's worth your time. We could just skip Dream Theater, right? I mean, come on, they didn't even have an album until 1989. The funny thing about Dream Theater is, they were the quintessential 80s prog metal band that never really was a prog metal band in the 80s, except they also were a prog metal band for half the 80s, just making demos and playing gigs in the East Coast underground and stuff. And when they put out When Dream and Day Unite in 1989 with original singer Charlie Dominici, it didn't really make a splash. It did lead them to getting signed to a better label and bringing in new singer James Labrie, dropping their now classic album Images and Words in '92, which was like a modernization of classic prog for the times, but they really changed it up with 1994's Awake, East West Records catalog number 90126. This is the lead single, Lie. The main new thing about Awake is it's heavy. This is kind of a funny fact, but on October 11th of 1994, Korn released their debut album, essentially introducing 7-string guitars riffing low and sludgy to the masses in a mainstream band context. But a week earlier, on October 4th of 1994, Dream Theater released Awake, with guitar virtuoso John Petrucci adopting a 7-string riffing low and sludgy for a good handful of tracks on the album. He totally scooped those guys. But I mean, otherwise there is very little similarity to Korn here. If anything, the low-heavy riffs of Awake somewhat bring to mind bands like Helmet or Prong or something. Vocals aside, but also the riffs of Awake don't stay that simple for that long, and within seconds you're vaulted into some crazy prog interlude. I really love how the band opted to shoot this one scene where they all stand behind Labrie not playing any instruments or anything, just like looming aimlessly. That is the most 90s thing about this video. Well, that and the trench coat. You would never see something like this before the 90s, and you would never see something like this after. Peak 90s. Also, this guitar solo and the visual manifestation of it is hilariously perfect, and established John Petrucci as a new guitar god to be revered. They really came out swinging on Awake, and I think it filled their tank enough to propel them through to establishing their own career. But it wasn't before one big experimental changeup. The band followed up Awake with an album in 1997 called Falling Into Infinity. While still a bit proggy, it absolutely attempted to craft a mainstream sound and really break through to a different kind of audience. A much larger and wider audience. They even called known hitmaker Desmond Child to co-write a song, though interestingly enough, this single, Hollow Years, is not the song they co-wrote with Desmond. I don't want to say it, but how prog of them. But here's the thing. This is the most non-Dream Theater sounding song. This is really their attempt at a big radio ballad, and if you can't already guess, it didn't work out. The album wasn't a hit, this song wasn't a hit, and they actually pulled a total 180 and released the super prog Metropolis Part 2 Scenes from a Memory album right after this. Another album that's just one long song, and essentially never tried anything like this ever again. I'm sure there are sing-songy moments on their albums after this, but this is an attempted alternative radio single. And I think rather than it being a failure, it showed potential. It was only a first try. And for them to just be like, you know what, we're prog. Our fans love prog, what we do is prog, we're leaning into the prog, man, is short-sighted. And they're big enough they could experiment more. Every 5 albums, try another album like this. You know, write some songs. You got it in ya. There's even a whole step modulation on the final chorus of this single. It's hilarious to think that while most bands go mainstream to achieve success, these guys are so prog they realized going mainstream didn't work and only alienated their prog head fans, and their most sensible move from an artistic business standpoint is to triple down on the prog to insane levels. I think it's a shame because this moment in 1997, when Dream Theater released a legit alternative rock single with a legit alternative rock video, is one of the coolest moments of their career for me to grab onto. It's just like a little ray of sunlight shining through a cloud, glowing golden, a promise of more. Alas, a promise unfulfilled.
Once the stone you're crawling under is lifted off your shoulders.
Anyway, I think it's cool that all of these bands kind of found their place to catch their wave in the 90s. It was a time of MTV and big hype and selling out and all that stuff. And it was a time for some dinosaurs to be made into minced meat. But it was also a time for forging new paths and weirding out and trying left field stuff under a big lens for some more cultivated artists. Other crazy things happened too, like this one alternative rock band went pretty prog. but that's another story for another time. And I've really got to be going. I still got a couple of hour-long songs to fit into my day. See you in the promised land.